Matthew, can you add Patrick?
Yeah.
Okay. I think he jumped off.
It says live now, so it's different. I
Okay,
think,
great.
yeah.
Let's try that again.
Okay.
All right, I'm adding you. I'm like an intermediary here.
Why can't we just add?
I don't know if she has this email for you or not. I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
Whatever. It's kind of funny it pops up there.
Okay. So now we are actually, has Patrick joined, or are you both going to share?
We're going to share. I'm about to hang up once he makes it in.
There he is. Okay. So we're just waiting for Sheila. There she is. Hi, Sheila. All right, great. Okay. So, from where we left off, we are actually trying to understand the data mapping coming through the mobile device and going through how we actually want to report out. And Patrick and Matthew, you let us know if we need to. I have the updated spreadsheet from before, so if you want us to open that, but I think what we need is just really walking through a scenario of how we're going to collect that data, and then and the data mapping. You know, there's a lot of questions about, you know, what's the difference between a goals and an objective and all of the other codes. So if you could walk us through that, you know, what the expectations of the volunteers on the mobile app should be collecting, which is really the activities and the, what's the other one? Measurements, and then assigning a cohort. And I think that's about it, but you give us that validation or confirmation, if you would.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And we could do this, you know, if you want to share your screen and just do like a concept map or something, just open up a Word or whatever, and we can walk through it together, that would be fine too. I think we just want to understand the data.
Okay. So tell me to like speed up or slow down as we go through this. But so we're asking the volunteer to collect 3 different things. We've got measurements, the people they work with, and then basically their activities. So you kind of think of these as, you can think of them as 3 individual things that we are then going to connect with each other. So a measurement is just a check-in on how you're doing on an outcome. So you're going to take that periodically, and you're going to take that with a certain reporting cohort or a group of people. So the measurements can be taken at any time, and they can be associated with any reporting cohort. I just say I'm taking this measurement, and I'm going to do it with this reporting cohort. And that is how we're measuring our progress. That's kind of like the big dog there. The measurements are like, how much of an impact are we making? Is that graph going up with this group of people? If so, we're doing well. If not, then we got to think about what we're doing because it's not working. The activities section is just basically a diary of what you're doing. So a diary of what you're doing. So you are keeping track of what you're doing, so that you can keep a record. So then you can look back on what your activities have been to see if to try to do some analysis and find some correlations between your measurements going up and your activities that you did. So that's about course correction and finding best practices and things like that, or finding things that didn't.
Patrick,
Yep.
could you maybe speak a little bit about that question that we had in the document about activities not being directly linked to outcomes? So if you're looking at an improvement in an outcome and you want to figure out what activities are related, there's no direct link, right? Because activities are linked to outputs and measurements are linked to outcomes. So could you maybe talk a bit about that?
Yeah, and okay. So an activity is not necessarily related to an outcome. So
Right.
that's what we're saying. An activity is related to who you did it with. So that means it's related to a reporting cohort, a group of people. So I say I did this activity and this is who I did it with, and I'm keeping track of them. And then I guess the relationship to measurements is just time. So it's like, when did I do these things in relationship to when I took my measurement? So then I know that, okay, I did this measurement and it went up. What did I do before this?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can add one thing there, Raj, because I think what your question's kind of asking is why are we reporting activities that relate to outputs and then measuring outcomes? Because it seems like there's a break then between activities and measurements potentially as you're like thinking about this.
Mm-hmm.
And the response that's been kind of communicated to me on that is basically, as we're submitting all of this data to Peace Corps headquarters, they'll have enough statistical data at that point to say these types of activities are considered most effective based on long-term outcomes, which is what we care about. It's impossible to say that like the study group that you did on a Wednesday fundamentally changed like the understanding of your students for the rest of their lives, right? They're gonna, like X% of them are gonna forget the lesson plan several hours after you taught it or whatever. So the idea is to not make a bad assumption saying that every single point of contact with an individual has that unique long-term benefit to them. And instead what we're saying is this short-term benefit can be attributed to an individual activity that happened on a Wednesday, but when we measure 3 months from now their comprehension of English skills, we can then say all these activities along the spectrum in the last 3 months likely contributed to this higher outcome, which is this broader goal long-term type.
So the objective to which an outcome, because another thing that's common between an objective and an outcome is the outcome and the output is the objective, right? So basically the objective in this case has no relevance to our discussion. So you cannot say that an activity that we did for an output in the same objective would be the one that affected the outcome. So if you look at the Excel sheet, you have the objectives column, right? The objectives can also be a link between an outcome and an output. So if you want to figure out whether an activity affects a given outcome,
Yes.
you wouldn't look at the activities related to outputs for that objective, would you? We're not making that link. We're saying basically any of the activities can affect anything.
So if you do an activity that spans multiple project objectives or something like that, you would be measuring outputs for all those different things. You'd be agnostic. You wouldn't care that one thing fell under objective 1.1 versus 1.2 as you're entering.
Right, but if I'm trying to figure out what activities affected my outcome, then would I go and look at the outputs for that same outcome?
That's for
objective.
That's when all the data syncs back. That's on us to do SQL queries and figure out relationships and do statistical analysis. That doesn't matter in terms of the app.
Okay.
Like as all this data is being communicated, the HQ people will make that link between a whole structure and try to make those determinations.
Okay, can I jump in here just a second as well, because we do have two students who probably are not further along in understanding the activities, outcome, output, and the measurements. So, are you saying that activities is to output as measurements is to outcomes? Are we making that direct correlation here?
Yeah, that's a simplified way to say it. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's not even simplified. That's what it is. So you.
Okay.
So, let me take 1 minute to back up way.
Yeah.
So So to think about how we got into this situation, so the fad in, or like the common thinking in monitoring and evaluation now is that outputs are worthless and that you shouldn't even do any outputs at all. Like that, the Millennium Development Goal indicators are all outcomes, and so measuring outputs are basically worthless. That's like the current thought. That wasn't the thought not that long ago. Um, and so how we got into this situation, and is we originally weren't doing any evaluation of our volunteers, so we just basically were just measuring how many people they touched. So we started doing only outputs. We said, okay, volunteers, tell us what you're doing and tell us how many people you're impacting. So basically, tell us all your activities and then tell us how many people are participating in those activities, and that's how we're going to report it out. And that's how we got started on this. Now, that's still lingering around, and I think it causes confusion still, is that we're still trying to grasp onto this output idea, when outputs really are just a measurement of how many people showed up at your activity. That's the simplified way to think about it.
Okay.
So that if you can just think about outputs as just, this is how many people showed up to this activity, and just leave it at that, forget it, you can, and then you're just thinking about measuring outcomes every once in a while and keeping track of your activities in between your measurements and who you did them with. That's, like, in a nutshell, the simplification of it all.
Okay, so an activity, so you record your activities against a measurement, though, correct? I mean, there is a data mapping between those two. I mean, we're not just going to, so, you know, a volunteer is assigned to a particular project, an objective, but all of that filters down to activities and measurements, though. Is that correct? So we can, and this is important for us on a database side. So we understand we're just storing it, but there is some mapping that needs to happen between an output and an outcome.
Yeah, so I mean, for the purposes of the data structure, Rose, you're correct, and the impact to the end user on that should be ease of entering data, because if the user initially sets up their app and they say they're a health volunteer in Botswana, it should be easier to get to the output indicators related to that field when they're entering stuff. But if they help another volunteer with another project, we don't want to exclude them recording data that relates to a totally different project framework, if that makes sense.
Yes,
But
that actually does. I mean,
there's not a direct link between outcomes and outputs, right, Rose? This is my understanding.
That's what. Well, no, that's not necessarily true, because a volunteer is going to be assigned to a post that is going to have certain objectives, and those objectives are going to be measured through the outcomes, and those outcomes are going to be measured or recorded are going to have recording of the activities that they've done against that particular outcome. So,
that's the thing. No, there is no link like that. You cannot say that you did an activity for an outcome. That's the thing. You can only say you did an activity for an output. They're two different things.
Right, that's true, and then the activity gets covered by a larger project framework, and that project framework and objectives and all that stuff do include corresponding outcomes that measure the overall progress, which I think is what Rose is talking about. Like, to know whether or not that top-level objective is being accomplished, you do measure that by outcomes. So you have
that's true. But from a database perspective, if you're looking at activities, right, the activities table has no link to your outcomes. It only measures outputs. That's what we said, right?
That's also true.
So there is no direct link. If you take an outcome and you want to see what activities pertain to that outcome, there is no way to do that.
Okay, so
you just assume everything you did after that.
That's the question that, well, let's talk about the activity then. When a volunteer is actually selecting, and there should be a set number of activities that is defined in a database somewhere that the volunteers are going to easily select from.
No.
Okay. Or they are going to enter. Now, from what I just understand, that's exactly what Matthew and Patrick said, that there should be a list of activities that the volunteers
No. I
Have a
think
list.
there's a list. There's a list of outputs. You define your own activities. You can do anything. Yeah.
You can define your own activities, but there
Yep.
are, I mean, Matthew and Patrick, is that correct? You can define your own activity, but there is also a list of activities?
There's a list of outputs.
Yeah, there's no list of activities. I think maybe the only thing that could be confused on that is like if you chose, like maybe in some of the UI we talked about like choosing from an activity that you already did or something. But that would be the only thing. So we want to give the volunteer the space to create and do whatever they want in terms of activities. They're only choosing. The only thing that we're like boxing them in on is the outcomes that we want them to achieve.
And also the outputs, right? Right, Patrick?
And outputs, I'd rather start talking about outputs as participation. So we're just like it's
There's
true
no
that
correlation between activity and output then. I mean, not direct correlation.
Between activity and outcome. Yeah. Activities have outputs or participations with them. The list of participations are predefined for you, so you can collect number of people who attended, with different numbers of things. That's predefined. But what activity you do is entirely up to you. When you define the activity, you choose a set of outputs that you think that activity will affect. Right? But you define your own activities.
and we're in a transition point on that, Raj. Even to just say, you know, the 90% of this, 90% of the outputs that we're talking about are just participation. So it's like even the, you know, in the most simplified way that it gets us 90% of it, you would just say activity, and then you would just fill out the participation buckets. And that would be it. You wouldn't even have to choose an output because those are going basically fading away. So like if I was just trying to think of like, because even when I've been working on this recently, it's just there has to be some sort of simplification here, and I think that comes from the idea of just taking participation and having the same participation for every activity and recording it the same way, and that basically covers all of your quote-unquote outputs.
Okay, but I think in the current feature requirements, we don't have that. We have a different set. We have a set of outputs, right, which can be different.
We sort of do, yeah. But we don't even have, like, that's been the struggle, is like trying to even get what those are, and they're like buried in a database I was trying to figure this out and actually get that actual hard data for us, it just became clearer and clearer that they aren't even being used, and they're not something we want to even think about building around, actually.
So for the purposes of PeaceTrack, we do have a list of outputs, right? Just to confirm, we have a list of outputs and we have a list of outcomes.
Yeah, but they're pretty much all this. I mean, they're pretty much all participation.
Right, but we do have a well-defined, predefined set of outputs.
Yeah, we don't have the disaggregations of those though, which kind of make it tough. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
But I think for Rose's purposes, I think outputs and outcomes are defined for us, and then the activities are user defined.
Okay, you got Pooja and Sheila, is that understood? So the predefined that we can have in a database is outputs and outcomes, and then user define what the volunteers can create are activities. Is that good?
Yeah, except they are also going to create the new output, the new attendance.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's true.
Okay.
Patrick, can
Say that again, Sheila.
Excuse me. They are now, the volunteers are now going to be not selecting an output from a drop-down menu. They will be entering a number. So technically, they're making that output measurement themselves. It's not really related to anything else.
I mean, I think so. We've already designed around the idea that they could choose from output, right? and I think that's fine. And if we can do that with the data that we have, I just wanted to say that like majority 90% of the time they're just going to be choosing a participation.
Sheila, if I might make a quick comment, I think Sheila's confusion. When you define an activity, Sheila, you will choose which outputs it affects. Okay, and the number that you enter is you interpret it as being a measurement, as being a unit of that output. So let's say you define an activity and your output is number of students who showed up at your lesson, right? The number that you enter, so let's say you enter 5, you interpret 5 as being the number of students that showed up. So that number of students showing up, that's predefined for you. The number that you're entering, 5, that's, you enter that yourself. But the output is predefined.
Right, so now it would just be that number. So
yeah, it's a number at the end of the day. They're all numeric values.
Okay.
But what they signify is predefined for you. So number of people, that's predefined.
Right. All right. But for now, it would just be a number. I mean, like, if it's not related to an output.
It is an output. Outputs are numbers. Just think of outputs as being numbers.
All right. Okay. So the
question is what to interpret that number as. So that is predefined for you. It can be number of people. It can be number of teachers. It can be a number of different things.
So where is this predefined list coming from for output? A predefined.
That's in the Excel sheet, rows.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. All of that is in
outputs and outcomes. Yeah. And they're defined based on sector and on post. So country, basically on country and the project, that defines which outputs and outcomes pertain to that combination.
And this is with the latest updated project framework indicator?
All of them have it, even from the beginning. The latest ones just have more data, that's it.
Yeah. And we were working on these, like, what we've been working on, and Anna has, what I've been working on was actually the disaggregation. So I wasn't changing any of the outputs or outcome, but we're looking at I was trying to get at the disaggregations of like what those boxes, so when we say number of teachers, like do we have to make it number of male teachers, number of female teachers? That's what I was working on to try to get all that.
I'm not sure if everyone in this conversation is aware of that.
Yeah, this is something that Rose and I were talking about. And so we have we have got that. So what we did, we looked at Thailand, and we got that, and what we found is that the disaggregation is basically the same for all of them, except for literally one. So that was like kind of the revelation that I had as like we were trying to go through this process. I was like, okay, I got to figure out now what are the breakouts of these indicators, and because 95% of them are all the same, and only there's one-offs that have changes, I was thinking we should move towards an idea of providing like basic rules for how the disaggregations would work, and we could apply them to all.
So is there a when we were talking about the predefined, is there those indicators are actually associated to one output or one outcome?
Yes.
So Sheila and Pooja, if you look at the spreadsheet, those indicators which we were talking about with Niraj, right? You were given an example of how many students showed up for this particular activity. That's actually going to be a predefined indicator, and then from there is actually the number 5 students showed up is actually the output. Is that correct?
Right. Right. And the 5, just to make it clear, because Patrick mentioned disaggregation now, 5 can be multiple fives, because you might have five people
Right.
between the age of, you know, 5 people below 10 years of age, 5 people between 20 above 24 years of age. So it can be more than one number, but they're all numbers. And for a given activity, all those numbers correspond to a predefined output.
Okay. Okay. Well, you say so the indicator. Let's say the indicator how many students showed up, right?
Yep.
For activity.
Yeah, but sometimes I think Peace Corps wants to see more granularity on the data, so they will ask how many people between the age of X and Y showed up, how many people between the age of, you know, different age groups showed up. That's a
Okay.
disaggregation.
Okay. Indicator equals that, and then the output of that.
So the output, okay, great. So the output of that indicator would actually be, and this is what I'd like to think about in terms of an overall rule, and we can discuss, like, do we need to, what can we do with the database to capture these one-off irregularities, and how hard that would be, and do we want to do that, or do we want to go with the 90%? So that's what I actually want to try to lay out today. So if we can think about this basic, so this basic rule. So I'm going to kind of lay this out for us. So you have an activity output. So you do an activity, and now the volunteer is going to, they wrote down kind of what they did. Now they're going to write the output, which is basically, remember that output is basically participation. That's what they actually are recording for 95% of all outputs. And so what I was going to suggest, or what I was going to propose as a simplified version, is for all outputs, literally every single output. So every time you do an activity, you would record an output of that is the participation, and it would be broken down into categories. It's basically males. So it's males 0 to 9, males 10, males 18 to, and male 25 plus. Then you would do the same with females. So females 0 to 9, you know, you get the point.
Right.
Dot dot dot. So that would be no matter in the simplified version. So Raj is talking about, we do have more data than this in that spreadsheet, but in the pure simplified version, we could just forget about all those. Anything that says output would have that disaggregation as the indicator, and it would just be number of people participated in that activity. And we would just simplify everything, and we treat every activity exactly the same, and the output of that activity would just be participation, and it would just be this disaggregation of males and females and their ages into 8 buckets, basically.
That's a good approach. I think Sheila and Pooja, that for the purposes of simplicity for now, so that when the volunteers actually enter in an activity, the output would actually be the participation and those categories, the male or females, and then the actual age group range. And I think that is definitely a simpler way for at least this release, right? And then we can build on that later.
And so, like, this is not where we are right now, but it's where we want to be, and we want to use this PeaceTrack model to push us towards this. And this is not just our opinion; this is everybody, but it's just a little bit it's a little bit tough to, we want to use this as a way to push ourselves towards a more simplified and more, because even we're spending forever trying to even communicate this. It's so hard. It's so complicated that we need to simplify first.
Okay.
So that's how we would treat activities. For outcomes, I would like to propose another simplified version.
Okay.
So
and
now,
these are from the measurements, right? And the outcomes are okay.
Our measurements, right? Exactly.
Okay.
Measurements are user defined.
And so these are already predefined. So we have a list of these. So we would actually use the list that's in there.
Okay.
So it number of whatever, and that's in that Excel spreadsheet. And so we would. So this one would be one step further complicated than the activity participation, where it would just be the same no matter what that spreadsheet say. We would treat it the same. For the outcomes, we do actually, and for the measurements, we do actually want to choose from that list and those definitions. But we're going to disaggregate them all the same. And it's basically it's actually 4 buckets. So it's males achieved, or no, sorry, males measured. So that would be how many people. So if you do a measurement with 15 people, you would measure, like, it's a quiz, and it's, let's say 80% is the pass rate, and you gave it to 15 people. You would say, okay, 15 people be males measured. I guess if they're all guys. And then the idea of males achieved. So achieved would be how many people have met that minimum requirement in your measurement. So it would actually, you would end up getting a percentage, basically, of, like, 10 out of 15 people we measured on this thing would be passed or whatever. And so that achieved is defined in the outcome. They say, like, number of teachers using lesson plans in their work. And so you could, as a volunteer, you would go and talk to all your teachers, write down how many teachers you measured, and then you would also include achieved, how many of those are actually using lesson plans. So it'd be like 10 out of 15 are using lesson plans, or 1 out of 15 are doing it. And you would do the same with females. Females measured.
But are you doing the achieved out of the whole, or just the males and the females? So if I looked at males achieved, is that males achieved out of just the males measured, or total measured?
That would be, so, like, let's say we did 20 people.
20 people.
And they were 10 females, 10 males.
Yes.
Okay. And let's say I talked to, out of the 10 females, 5 were using lessons plans, and out of the 10 males, 4 were using lesson plans. I would report it out as males measured 10, males achieved 4,
Okay.
females measured 10, females achieved 5.
Okay.
That's how I would report it out.
Okay.
So from the app's perspective, these are just 4 text fields, and the PCV has the job of entering the right values. We can do basic data validation. For example, achieved cannot be more than measured.
Correct.
But at the end of the day, the PCV will enter the values. We, as an app developer, don't care. We just provide 4 text fields for them to type in.
Correct. And so that would be how we treat all the outcomes.
Okay.
And just to confirm, the measurements are completely user-defined, right? What you do for the measurements is up to you. It could be a test. It could be, I don't know, something else. That's entirely up to you.
Yes. And so we actually,
A lot of different ways to measure.
yeah, there's a lot of different ways to measure, and there's teams of people trying to put together like standard measurement activities that we don't that aren't there yet. We don't have those. So
Okay.
those aren't that we can build
So-
around.
So for this implementation, these are going to be user-defined and not predefined.
Yeah, outside of the definition of the outcome,
Mm-hmm.
all of it is user defined.
Okay, all user-defined.
The outcomes do come from that list, but what you do for the measurement is up to you.
Correct. Correct.
Pooja, Sheila, any questions?
Yeah,
Something need clarified?
I have one question. Do you guys want to see the number of males and females within a cohort when you create a cohort?
A good question. So this is actually something Matthew and I were talking about last night, and so there's kind of two competing theories on this. One would be almost like the thought that like you can't, when you just say a group of people, it's so hard to be specific that you really should be doing, these are the people in this cohort, and you got their names, and you got their ages, and you got their sexes, and you go individually and report out individually. So people say that's the only way you're going to get really accurate data. On the other hand, people are like, there's no way we could ever do that. It's too much of an ask to actually know who is actually there, especially when you're talking about tons of people. It's easy when you work with 5 people, but when you're working with hundreds, to be able to do that. So what we kind of came to the conclusion last night is that we're going to go with the latter. So we're going to go with the idea that individualized reporting is not exactly what we're going to shoot for. So that means the reporting cohort is just going to be a name, pretty much. It's just going to be a way for you to define this like general group of people that you're working with.
It doesn't make data entry faster if you already know male, female, and age. Wasn't that also part of it?
Yeah, but it's you're gonna have to. I mean, so what Matthew's talking about is like, okay, so if we defined with a reporting cohort, like who the males and females are and their ages, then we would be able to make it faster to do the outcome measurements, because you could say whatever.
But you're assuming that everyone from the cohort shows up, right? That's not
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And so
Well,
actually,
there's ways around that, but yeah.
there are ways around it, but I was doing a lot of thinking on this last night, because you could argue both ways. I think what we're gonna do for this is, since we're already going to be doing participation, we're already going to be doing outcome measurements.
Yeah.
I think we're just going to leave reporting cohort as literally a word.
Yeah.
And that's just like and that's it, because that's all we can. It's just the most simplified way. And we're going to buy into this idea that it's too hard to be that specific.
Mm.
Does that make sense, Sheila?
Yeah,
Okay. All right, so that was easy enough. The cohort. Okay. So, I think we're good on the activity measurement and the cohort. Are we?
Like a participation sheet every time they do a measurement, report all that stuff. How are we measuring males, females? Like
They count them.
Just
They
count?
count. Yep.
and
So
then you associate it with the name. You say this is my soccer cohort.
yeah. Yep. So Sheila, I will say though, like I will say that like anything we wanted, there is some room for activity, but for reporting cohorts, the only other data would be so that, like, the only benefit that we're really looking for in adding more data about a reporting cohort would just be, I guess, so the volunteer doesn't confuse the reporting cohorts. Like that would be the only thing. Like, so if I said like, I think the natural thing would be like when you first get there to say, this is the market ladies, because you don't know everybody very well. And
So a
then,
short description.
what's up?
A short description would be good for that.
Yeah, just so you can separate out who you're talking about, and force the volunteer to think about, because then you might, later on you might realize that the market ladies, there's the Muslim market ladies and there's the Christian market ladies that are totally separate and interact differently with each other based on culture or something like that. So a little bit of an idea of if we could just put a little short description, just with the goal of helping the volunteer distinguish which cohort is which, is the only real value to adding more than just a flat out name.
All right.
So I had a question at this point. So Patrick, you said outcomes you're pulling in from the Excel sheet, right?
Yeah.
Is it also true for outputs, or are you just assuming that it's only going to be a number of people?
Can you say the second part of that real quick?
Do you also want to pull the outputs from the Excel sheet?
That's the hard decision we got to make right now. And I'm saying that I would love it if we could build around that, but we could, if possible, I'd love the idea. I'd love to design the database so that we don't have to make major changes if that doesn't work. If we need to come back and pull in outputs.
So right now you don't want to want us to pull in outputs from the Excel sheet, right?
Right. I want to, yeah, for the user interface, I want it to just be participation.
Okay.
But this is a hypothesis that I'm pretty confident in. But if possible, if we could design the database to be, still have a spot for that or something. I don't know. Does that,
Okay.
as a secondary thing, if possible. I'd love to keep some flexibility in there, but I just think the writing's on the wall with this, that we're getting out of the output game in general. And right now, I mean, we asked the volunteers to do participation and outputs and outcomes, and it doesn't make any sense to anyone. And it's just because we started with participation, then we started to throw on indicators on top of it, and now we're like, oh crap, we can't do all three.
So I would like to add a cautionary note that at any point if you decide to change, you always have to think about backwards compatibility, right? Because, for example, you're talking about disaggregation, you gave us 6 different categories. If at some point down the line you decide to change those age ranges, you're possibly losing data from the past that you already collected, right? So because you don't have the exact information, you just have an age range.
Right.
So yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
Well, no, I thought about this, and I thought, I was weighing that against the idea that, if we went down to the disaggregated level, those are more likely to change than these. I mean, this is a little bit more, I mean, that being said, Raj understands we just added a 4th bucket in the last year, and it's causing us trouble with RealTrack, but I think in terms of stability, these seem to be more stable than any of the disaggregations, and so I actually thought that going this route would actually help us in that fact.
Okay.
Hello. I have a comment on the login screen. Pooja and I decided that we want to collect the volunteer ID number on the login screen for the future, so that, we're not using it right now, but so that it will be personalized to an individual reporting, and we'll gather their name as well, their full name. What do you guys think about that?
So you're saying just having the volunteer put in their volunteer ID?
Sign in. When they sign into the application, have a login.
Which is a one-time screen.
Yeah. Does it matter
I mean, Sheila, that's smart. My concern is I don't know it.
Okay.
That'd be my only concern. Because otherwise we'd be using email, right? If we didn't use volunteer ID, we'd be using email to be the unique identifier.
Mhm.
We could do that.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, on the VRT HQ side, we need to associate with the volunteer ID. So I don't know if like we're putting the burden of matching on HQ side, or if there's an easy way to.
No, I mean your volunteer IDs are matched to a volunteer by their name as well as their contact information, and I'm hoping the contact information has their email address as part of that.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll make the assumption, and then we'll just we'll run some tests on that and see how it works.
Yeah, because in a world, in a world in which they all have their if they have a volunteer email,
Mhm.
then we would be able to just map the volunteer email to their. Yeah.
Okay. And
I
so
would say, Sheila, that we're moving very rapidly towards the idea of standardized emails for our volunteers, which we should be able to map to a volunteer ID. And so that might be just in terms of pure user ease of experience. I know it's not that difficult to put it in once, but I think I'd like to maybe just leave that burden on us and not the volunteer to put that in.
okay.
We'll do email for now then. We'll have an email field.
We'll do the volunteer side on the back end as a login, as keeping that data. Okay. Sheila, Pooja, Niraj, did you all have any more information on activity measurements or the cohort? Because I really want to get onto the back end of things as well.
Did you mean if you have any more questions or any more information?
Any more questions?
No, I don't have any more.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. So, thanks for that. I appreciate that. At least we got that the front end cleared up. So as we move out from the UI side and then actually moving into the server side, how does all of this from an output outcome associate with at the high levels, like the posts, the sectors, the objectives, and I think there was something else there too.
Patrick, maybe you could do like a quick walkthrough through
Yeah.
a row of the Excel sheet. That would be much helpful.
And let me know which one you're open, which you're going to walk through. I can have any one of them open, but just let me know which one you want to walk through.
Okay.
Do you want me to go meet with Andrea, or what do you want to do?
Hold on one second. But I think I need to go meet him just because it's tough like that.
You want me to send you something real quick, or?
No, I have this meeting planned that's thinking of me Matthew could take this question, and I'm going to this other.
Oh, it's already 10 o'clock? Jeez. Okay.
It's already 10 o'clock. But I don't know why we have an echo.
I think the Sheila's.
Wait, what? Sorry.
You were hearing an echo.
Oh, there we go.
Good. Yeah, is this on the stuff that Kevin sent us?
So no, this would just be explaining what how the whole objectives roll up to a sector.
Okay.
So I think the key thing to just understand it, like the PDI and SI thing, maybe like that explanation, and the objectives and stuff are just a way to organize and choose which indicators they want.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Okay. All right. They're in the innovation room. All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
All right. So, what's the most helpful thing for me to start with? I guess because I think we've talked about like, the data stuff already quite a bit and how it's all structured. So, on the
let's start with the updated project because that was the latest one that had the goal, objective, post sector mapped out to the indicator.
This is the data diagram.
No, the
No,
updated
it's the Excel.
spreadsheet. The updated project framework indicator lists PeaceTrack.
Great.
That's the whole name of it.
All right. I know Anna, our intern's working on a even more robust version of this. Yeah, Rose, I'm on Patrick's laptop. Do you mind shooting that to me?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Are you on Gmail or?
It's Showcat33. Yeah, he's on Gmail somewhere here.
Okay. Showcat33?
At Gmail. Yeah.
All right, on its way.
Or maybe we can share your screen. It's not coming up here.
Hold on, I think I can. This is Patrick. Okay, let me. All right, yeah. Let's do that. Let me go back here. I'll share my screen. There we go. Can you see that? You see the PeaceTrack?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. Matthew?
Yep, I see it too.
Okay. So we've already talked about the right side, right? We've actually talked about the outputs and outcomes.
Yep.
The SI code, that's just what, standard indicator, and PDI is what? The
Post-defined indicator. So yeah, so the ones we care about more are the SI, the standard sector indicators. So these are the ones that HQ has defined and said this is what we're measuring. And then if the country wants their volunteers to measure extra things on top of that, they'll create their own, which are PDIs.
Okay, PDIs are created by the volunteers.
No, they're created by the post. So it's still Peace Corps staff, but it's the like Senegalese staff that want their Senegal volunteers to measure additional things, for instance.
Okay.
It's still Peace Corps creating them for the volunteers, but our emphasis on this project is on the SI ones more so.
Okay. All right, so PDI, PDIs are created by the post, and SIs are created by headquarters, correct?
Yep.
All right. So now, are each one of these SIs, these indicators, associated as a one-to-one to goal and objective?
An one outcome could potentially measure multiple objectives. So it could be
Okay.
it could be one to many from right to left on that spreadsheet. It's not as common, but you could potentially have an outcome that's like English literacy, and that affects two objectives. It affects teachers' English literacy, and it affects students' English literacy. I'm making that up, but it's unfortunately not a clean one-to-one across there.
Okay. And the goal versus the objective. The goal is just a very high level for that particular post, and then the objective is a more deep down. I'm assuming from the spreadsheet.
Yep.
Okay.
And
So there could be
this is a tabular version of that data framework that's on GitHub, you know, where it has that kind of tree structure that slowly works its way down.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, you know, just the tabular version of that. So yeah, so it's reading basically left to right, largest to smallest.
Okay, and these improving teaching goals is actually, if I'm looking at just goal 1, then they're breaking down into many objectives for that particular goal.
Yep.
And the goals are set by the posts?
No, that HQ.
Okay, goals.
This entire spreadsheet, except for those PDIs, which are tacked on, are all HQ. This whole thing's HQ.
Okay, the whole thing is HQ. Okay.
Yep.
All right, and I think I have the sectors. There are only, six sectors? Yeah, 6 sectors, and then a post.
There's usually 1 or 2 goals underneath for each post.
Okay, for each post. Okay. Okay. I think that's actually it. Let me make sure that I'm answering all of my students' questions.
And the thing that I learned when I was in Senegal is that volunteers know this is called a project framework. They know their framework like the back of their hand. They know what their goals are. They know what the objectives are all called. They have all this stuff memorized. And yeah, I mean, they probably even have most of the outputs and outcomes memorized too at this point, because once you actually get down to an individual volunteer, like our spreadsheet here is like 4,000 rows or something ridiculous. But for the actual like volunteer, you know, when you get down to a very specific, you're in Thailand, you're an education volunteer, and you're working on goal 1, you're really only measuring like 10, 12, 15 things. So it's a pretty easy list for an individual on the ground to memorize, actually. So they'll be able to recite off the goals that they're working towards and the objectives that fall under those goals pretty easily without looking at anything.
So when they're actually collecting the data on their mobile apps, and then we are actually collecting it and saving it on the database side, how are we determining, is it by the volunteer ID and they are actually associated to a post and it's assigned that way? How is that mapping happening right now, currently?
The PCV ID, the Peace Corps volunteer ID, is that's our unique ID across all of our databases, and so we do have a database that knows where they are based on that ID. So we've got a database of here's where you're serving and in what sector and here's what you're doing. And so if we use that as our unique ID, I know we're not mapping to that currently because volunteers don't know their ID, only we know that. So that's a challenge that we need to figure out a solution to, and that's really on our IT side. And I picture that as being something that we're going to have to add after you guys hand us over the project, because I don't know how to give you guys the tools to build that in right now, to be honest. It's
well, this is, you know, the approach right now, since they do have a login. That login is going to the volunteer is going to enter in their email address on the mobile app. We will have to, on the back end, associate that with their PCV ID, and all the data that's collected will be according to that PCV ID for the post, the sector, and things like that.
Yep.
So they will be assigned. Well, that's a good question. So are each volunteers assigned? Can they be assigned to multiple sectors, or just one sector. Okay,
Yep.
that's good to know. Volunteers assigned to one sector. And so are they assigned also, is that a one-to-one all the way through, like a goal? They're assigned to one goal or maybe multiple goals?
I don't know.
Okay. But that's something that you could find out from us. We got some information from FENDA, which is very helpful, but that would be helpful to us as well. Because they could. I mean, from what I'm looking at the spreadsheet, they actually could be working on multiple things, and so it's just good to know on how we actually map and assign these data.
I think that's correct, but I'll check.
Okay. Okay. All right. I think that's good for now. And if we have questions from the back end team, then we will just send you some questions as before.
Sure.
And then I think I'll do like a concept map of what we talked about today, and then just disseminate it out to everyone. Pooja, Sheila, any last minute things? Niraj?
I had a question about the info hub. Is it okay to ask here? I'm not sure.
What's your question? And then I can.
Okay. I was just wondering if we will be having API endpoints to query against.
Oh yeah, we will. And I think Ronnie, she had a test at this hour, but we'll set up a time that we can talk development on that point.
Okay, and it's going to be JSON encoded data?
Yeah, she actually did JSON for the malaria one as well. So
okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and Matthew, do you have anything for us? Any questions?
No, I know the spreadsheet that we're looking at, our intern Anna's still updating it and stuff, so it's in the correct structure and format. I think there's just a few more data points being added to this still. So,
okay.
So just caveat that one thing, and we're working on that.
And Niraj, Pooja, and Sheila, Ronnie worked on the model already, and I'll send you the model. But Matthew, I may have to do like a graphical representation of that file because it really is just a file. So I'll figure out something that you can actually understand.
I cut out for a second. Just wondering, when did we decide to try and do that functionality with the volunteer ID? Was that after the summer, or when?
Well, we're going to have to use it from the back end. So when you all do a login, all you're going to take is the email address. But in order for us to assign it to take all the activities they're collecting and assign it on the back end, we need that PCV ID. So we're going to use that for now and then plan for future development on that as well.
Okay, cool.
So all you're using is just the email address.
All right.
Sheila and Pooja, my indicator, I typed this in the group chat in case you guys didn't see it, I'm just mentioning it. The indicators SQLite that I gave you does not have the SI code. Okay, so if you need that, you'll have to do a conversion again. And you have to modify the Python script that I wrote.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I know we went over time a little bit, and Matthew, I appreciate the time that you stuck around to do that for us.
Yeah, no, thank you all. This is, I know we're totally in the weeds on all the data stuff, but that's a good place to be at this point. So I'm glad to be doing this.
All right. Okay. This will be posted, and I will send out the link to the YouTube to everyone because I know there was a few people who weren't able to make it. So. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
I'll work on updating the requirements doc with these notes and the decisions Patrick made on this as well, and I'll work on getting that done soon.
All right, great. All right, thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.